Welcome to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my dear friend and co-host, Jacob Acquire. We're going to start where we always start, and unfortunately, it's just been loss after loss the past month or so, and that is the Panthers' recent one at home against the Atlanta Falcons. Was actually in attendance at that game and stayed for, I want to say, the first 58 minutes of the game, and wanted to leave earlier in the fourth quarter when I knew we weren't going to be able to rally after that turnover when we were marching down the field, and it was 28-20 within a one-score game. And we'll definitely talk more about that specific play where Andy Dalton tried to target Ian Thomas coming across the right side of the formation. What were the big key takeaways in this game? Is there anything we can glean from it and actually hope for maybe a win or two in the coming weeks?
Well, I hope so. And first of all, I got to give you props for staying that long. If it were me, I'm getting out of there probably after about 20 minutes. You know, the only reason I would have stayed was the uniform combination, though. We had the black helmets, all blue with the black socks. I think that's our best look probably ever. I might be that might be a little out there because we only had the black helmets for a couple of seasons now.
What about the all black with the black helmets?
I don't like this. The blue looks so good. Like, look at your neon sign there. Look at the lights I have up there. It's like that kind of blue, and it fits so well, especially how since we're getting into fall now, it started off bright, and then because it was a late window game, the sky went dark and it got into night at the end there. I thought it looked great. But unfortunately, yeah, we walked away with a loss. Not a ton of positivity to take away from this game. That seems to be a recurring theme every week. I will say I liked what we saw from the rookies. Trevin Wallace forced fumble recovery, which I don't know how it looked live. On the broadcast, it just looked like he forced an incompletion. But then they, I think Canales challenged it, and we get the ball back. And I think that led to a field goal after that, where we went up 10-7. On the touchdown drive, the second touchdown drive, obviously Xavier Legette scores his second NFL touchdown. Maybe we can switch up the celebration now. I know the riding the horse was cool the first time. Let's get a couple more moves up in there. But on that drive to set up the touchdown, Jatavian Sanders had a couple big catches. Jalen Coker had a couple big catches. So I like what I see from the young guys. I thought the patchwork offensive line came along, particularly in the second half when we started to establish the run. But there's some penalties early on. You know, you hate to see those. Icky had, I think, 2 false starts in the first quarter. You hate to see those. But I guess the only other big positive is that our 2-minute offense was strong again this week. It was something I mentioned last week on the pod, how right before half and coming out of half with urgency, that seems to be our most effective moment with the ball, like driving down the field. And we had another example of that this past week. But after that, you're right. It's mostly negative, right? The offense's margin for error is like this close. It's almost zero, really, with the way the defense is playing. And at some point, you just have to realize if the defense can't tackle people, can't stop the run, can't do anything, the offense is going to have to be perfect. And unfortunately, perfect is not what we saw from Andy Dalton in this game.
No, it's not what we saw from Andy Dalton. And unfortunately, it was one of those situations, and Panthers Twitter kind of got into that 2nd and 8 play call because that's really where the game came down to. You're in a one-possession game. You're driving. You're in your opponent's territory. You've had success running the ball all day. That's what got you onto the other side of the 50 was running the ball in that drive in particular. And you go away from that. Andy Dalton leaves a clean pocket. Obviously, a lot of the routes, you had a lot of either post or crossing routes to the right side. Andy Dalton understands that. He rolls out with it, and he just makes a poor choice. You're throwing into a window where there's 3 or 4 defenders, maybe 1 or 2 wide receivers, depending on where you look at that fly route on the outside. But it's just one of those low probability throws you shouldn't be making. And if it was Deontay Johnson or Xavier Legette, I understand from a coaching perspective or maybe the play perspective, you're supposed to feed that hot hand, your best player, so to speak, on the field. But this was backup tight end. This is Ian Thomas, who not only has struggled during his time as a Panther in the passing game, he's struggled with drops. And it's just, why are you going towards him when you have Jonathan Mingo wide open in the flat, who at the very least, if he were to just fall down and catch it like he did last week in Chicago, he probably picks up 4 or 5 yards and you set yourself up for a third and manageable situation. This wasn't a third down. This wasn't a fourth down. You didn't have to push the ball past the sticks. And in that case and scenario, Andy Dalton did. And so a lot of people are on kind of that play call, the decision making, and rightfully so. When you make those errors with how bad the defense is from an injury and talent perspective, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a lot of one of Bryce Young's interceptions last year. It was the game here. It was versus Dallas, and Bryce gets pressure. Andy Dalton wasn't pressured on this play. He just rolled out to the right. Bryce gets pressured, comes out to the right, and it's a drag route by Mingo coming across. He throws it to him, and because Mingo's wasn't perfectly straight to the sideline on his route, Deron Bland undercut it, and I think that was a pick six. This time, Ian Thomas also isn't perfectly flat on his route. AJ Terrell undercuts it and takes the interception there. And like you're saying, Jonathan Mingo was open. I don't have an issue with the play call per se because there were answers there, and Andy Dalton just didn't take the answer. He could have ran for 2 or 3 yards, probably a little bit more. He showed off his wheels on that drive before half. I didn't know he had it in him, so maybe he could have scampered for 5 or 6 yards there. I don't know. But there were answers there, and people on social media, on Twitter, complaining, oh, we ran that whole drive. Why are you going away from the run? 2 plays before that, there was a 15-yard completion to Deontay Johnson, and nobody complained about that. And then the play before that set up the interception, Chuba got stopped on the run for only 2 yards. So I can understand wanting to throw a pass in there when, 1, you've already done it on the drive, and 2, the run game allows you to do that when the run game's working. It's just Andy Dalton made a poor decision there. And I can't fault Dave Canales for throwing a passing play in there. Maybe design it to Jatavian Sanders instead of Ian Thomas or something like that. Have better pass catchers available on the field for passing plays like that. But Jatavian Sanders has had drops when he's been on the field this year. So it was kind of a tough situation overall. And Dalton just makes the wrong choice there. And then later in the game, I thought it was funny. Mark Sanchez was actually calling this game. Huge upgrade over Vilma, I'll say. But it was funny because they panned to Bryce Young, and the game was out of hand at that point. It was 38-20, and they were talking about what can the Panthers do for Bryce Young in the future? What's his future look like? And Sanchez says, well, I really think Young needs to sit back and learn from a professional. And as soon as he said the word professional, Andy Dalton lets go of the ball. I think it was Clark Phillips jumped in front of it, and it should have been a pick six, but he slid down inbounds so that they could kneel the ball away and end the game right there. And I just thought it was funny that as soon as he says, yeah, Young should learn from a professional, and right there jumps the route picked and should have been taken back for a touchdown. We didn't lose by 18. In my book, we lost by 24 or 25.
Yeah, no, and it goes from a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter. The stadium was getting into it. It was getting a little raucous, and that's what you want to see. You want to see competitive games in your home stadium. It was just unfortunate the way the end of the game unraveled. To your earlier points about Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker, what's nice is that they're starting to kind of be the 2-3 wide receiver in the offense. It's very reminiscent of 2015 when we drafted Devin Funchess in the second round and then had undrafted free agent Philly Brown, who was phenomenal. And so having those two guys kind of step into those roles behind Deontay Johnson, I think is great for the offense moving forward. We talked about it last week. We expected Jalen Coker to start to take more of a role over Jonathan Mingo. And sure enough, in this game, he outsnapped him 43-30 snaps. Watching the game live when Mingo was on the field, it was typically run plays. And this is what we talked about last week. We thought he was a viable blocker in the run game and Jonathan Mingo. And the aspect of him in the passing game was clear out routes. I saw it in the third quarter a few times where he's simply just trying to push the defensive backs a little bit further so Andy Dalton could kind of work the intermediate area of the field. So again, he has definitely been demoted on the depth chart. And the biggest thing is it just keeps going back to the sunk costs that we now have to live with the Scott Fitterer draft picks. And I don't know if they were necessarily Scott Fitterer, considering that David Tepper and Steve Smith had a hand in some of these picks, but that's neither here or there as Dan Morgan is trying to rebuild this defense and team.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from John Ellis, who's the Panthers historian on Twitter, and he was showing all the draft picks from the Fitterer era. I think it was 61 picks, and of that, 11 were still on the team. That's just untenable. The later rounds of the draft are what build your depth to where, number one, you don't have to overspend on free agents like we had to this year. Number two, when those guys go down, you have NFL players you can put up there, not practice squad players or guys you have to sign off other teams' practice squads when that depth goes missing. Like look at our linebacker room, for example. If you're able to hit on some of those picks, it does wonders for your team. Look at Chuba Hubbard, who I would say is the only day three hit that Scott Fitterer had during his tenure here. He's been excellent. It took him a while to get going. Remember, his rookie year was not the best, but he's one of the best backs in the league right now. And when you're able to do that, and hopefully we were able to do it with guys like Jatavian Sanders, Trevin Wallace this year, when you're able to have those kind of guys contributing to your team, it's really, really huge for team building. And hopefully, like you're talking about, Dan Morgan can erase some of the Scott Fitterer, David Tepper, and I'm going to throw Matt Rule decisions in there because Rule did have control of the roster, at least for the first year and a half before they hired Fitterer. So hopefully we can overcome that. My main takeaways from this game is, or the main takeaway for me is, if Andy Dalton is playing at a poor level, and I think he did play well versus the Raiders, then we talked beforehand, he did play well versus the Bengals. You helped me kind of remember that a little bit. But last week it was slipping a little bit. Don't want to blame that on him. The O-line was getting destroyed all day. And then this week versus the Falcons, no sacks allowed by this O-line with two backups in, which is impressive. Very few pressures. I just think Andy Dalton didn't play well. He was missing throws. He had the two interceptions. And then there were plays where people came open. Like I can think of one. It was trips right with Coker, Leggett, and I believe David Moore. On the left is Deontay Johnson. And it's a 3rd and 8. Coker comes open immediately. And the whole time, Dalton's just staring down Deontay Johnson, throws it to the sideline. It gets knocked away by the DB. I think if it were like Sauce Gardner or something, he probably could have picked it, or Surtain probably could have picked it. Andy Dalton's just not seeing it. Maybe this was just a one-game anomaly, but like these are the kind of mistakes Bryce Young was making. And a lot of the mistakes Bryce was making where he would see the guy, he would just chuck it 5-10 yards over his head. But if Andy Dalton isn't seeing these guys, like I feel like we're going to end up seeing Bryce sooner rather than later, because to me, the season is not salvageable. I think we can understand that. The defense is just too bad. If we're looking at it from a watchability standpoint, it's not watchable anymore either. I saw, I can't recall his channel's name. It's Dunked on Demand. He's a big Panthers fan, big content creator. I saw one of his breakdowns after the game. He was talking about people are complaining about the team being watchable. This defense isn't watchable, and I agree. This defense is Swiss cheese. So at some point, sooner rather than later, if Dalton continues to play this way, I think we need to see Bryce back in there. I guess that's my main takeaway, because like we talked about when Mike K came on here, like we talked about after Bryce got benched, the reason he came here or was given the job and why Dan Morgan was given the job was they were Bryce people, like that was part of the reason they came here, was to fix Bryce or make Bryce work. And if we're going to continue to see bad week after bad week of Andy Dalton, where we only saw two granted really bad weeks of Bryce, what's the point? Especially when somebody like Jonathan Brooks comes back when we get reinforcements, or reinforcements on the defense like DJ Wanham, Amari Barno, Dane Jackson. When some of those guys come off of IR and PUP, and if Andy Dalton continues to struggle, there's just no point for him to still be the starting quarterback to me going forward.
We're going to have to see if Jonathan Brooks comes back. And Panthers Twitter has come out and spoken that if he misses this year, that was a miss of a pick. You don't waste a second round pick on a guy that is coming off an ACL injury and then just misses entire rookie year. There's no good NFL reps. You are going into your second year, in essence, a rookie. And that's just, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. But to your point about Bryce and Andy Dalton, I think the issue is when you look back at those first two performances with Bryce Young at the helm, they were abysmal offensively. We ranked 32nd in EPA per play, 32nd in success rate. We couldn't do anything offensively, and they were two of the top 10 worst performances we've seen from the Panthers since 2011. Now, over the past 2 weeks, after a good spurt against the Raiders and the Bengals, Andy Dalton's come back down to earth. The offense doesn't look nearly as great. Now, overall, that 4-week stretch, the offense ranks 20th in EPA per play and 16th in success rate. So we're a little bit more effective. We're in the window that I was talking about in the offseason, that if Bryce Young was kind of in that 16 to 20 range, that's a direction where you can move forward as a franchise with. And we're seeing that with the backup quarterback. So The performances that we saw against Chicago, that was the 19th worst performance since 2011. And then this past week against Atlanta was the 25th worst. So for those of you watching the YouTube video, you can see this on the graphic. We had three of these games in the bottom 25 since 2011 last year. And we already have 4 this year. When I see teams like the Chargers, the Chiefs and the Eagles and some other teams that have a lot of talent, you just wonder if there's going to be more of these bad losses that come, especially when we haven't even played the Buccaneers in our division, and they look really, really good on offense, and they probably have the horses on defense to kind of keep us in check and force a few errors throughout the game. So this isn't looking good from a team standpoint. When you look at it from a future standpoint, teams like the Commanders, the Patriots, while they have young quarterbacks they're building around, they actually have cap space to work with. And right now we have $52 million in dead cap, $32 million on IR. We rank 3rd with the most money on the injured reserve list, 8th most money in dead cap money. So those numbers are sky high. And we only have the 20th highest salary cap to work with in terms of cap space going in the next year. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room to now just go out and add talent in free agency. So we're going to have to build this from the ground up through the draft. And while it is great to see Xavier Legette and Trevin Wallace kind of give us some oomph, we haven't seen any of that from our day 3 picks. We haven't seen Jonathan Brooks on the field. And we're going to have to rely on next year's rookie class just as much. And so, again, the margin of error is not only so small for the offense, it is for the entire front office right now when it doesn't look good from a roster talent standpoint and what we have to work with to kind of fill in those holes moving forward. So I don't know the perspective you see this, but I don't see this as like you go back to John Fox when he took over. He took over a 1-15 team. We were 7-9 the next year. Ron Rivera takes over in 2011. Obviously, you draft Cam Newton, who is a big franchise changer, but you go from 2-14 to 6-10 to where you are starting to get to that 500 level. When are we getting to a 500 level? Like, we're putting up like awful performances week in and week out, no matter who's at quarterback. And there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. I mean, we play the Washington Commanders this week, and I have a feeling they're just going to run us out of the stadium. Like, it's just that bad.
Yeah, this for sure. We're not sniffing 500 this year. Let me start with that.
But next year, do you think we're a 500 team next year?
To me, it depends. Because I saw this year as a take your medicine year, and I thought we would be better than we are now. I didn't see the offense being as bad as it was, and the injury to Derek Brown really just stonewalled the ability to stop the run. So I think when we started the year, I said like 5 or 6 wins. I think that was around where both of us were. I think we'd be lucky to get 5 or 6 now. Looking at our schedule, Washington's next at Washington, and then at Denver are the next 2. Those 2 are like 2 of the rest of the games. Looking at it, I think those 2 are the 2 games that we have a chance in compared to the rest of them. Obviously, we played Dallas as well, and Dallas just looks horrible to me. So maybe there's a chance there, but we also have New Orleans again, the Giants in Germany, and the Giants seem to have turned a corner a little bit. Then we come back to Kansas City, Tampa, like you're talking about, Philly. Maybe if Nick Sirianni keeps chirping at the fans, stuff will go wrong there. Who knows? Dallas, I could see. The Cardinals, I don't know. And then to end the year, we go to Tampa and to Atlanta, probably 2 losses. So where we're looking for wins, I don't know. But like you're saying, as far as a team building perspective, this is going to have to be from the draft. And the thing that I can take some solace in, I suppose, is Legette has shown flashes. Trevin Wallace, when he's been forced into the fire, has shown some flashes. Hopefully we can get Jonathan Brooks on the field. I know in his presser yesterday, Dave Canales mentioned that they were probably going to open his practice window this week. When the practice window is open, he has 3 weeks to be activated. Otherwise, he misses the rest of the season. So hopefully he is back and ready. But we need to see something from him. We need to see something from our rookies to give us a little bit of confidence that maybe the front office, maybe some of the coaches that stick around, because I'm not sure Coach Evero is long for Carolina if the defense continues to perform the way it is. Maybe they can develop a little bit of talent, and that gives me hope for next year. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to be rough. And this just goes back to what this franchise has become since Tepper's taken over. The chart you have here, like you talked about, looking at all of these worst 25 games, you're obviously highlighting the ones that are this season, but you can see some of the ones that have occurred over the past couple of years, like New England in 21, New York and the Giants in 21, last year's Jags, the Dolphins in 21. That's where Cam came back and we got boat raced and Joe Brady got fired halfway through a bye week. Like there's a lot of recent Tampa Bay in 2021 as well. A lot of recent bad games during the David Tepper tenure, and it's only going to continue just because of the state the roster's in, from the people he hired to put the roster in that place. And before we move on to around the NFL,
before we do this on the team building front, and I want to throw this out to you, I'm going to go down a list of guys where if you tally up how much they are making from a annual average value, it's about comparable to Burns. And I want you to tell me if you want the group of players I'm about to read off or Brian Burns, who's healthy, generating pressure, actually making an impact in New York. And those guys include Jadeveon Clowney, who got signed to a $20 million deal for 2 years. So that's $10 million AAV. And then you have guys like Josie Jewell, Ashawn Robinson, Yosa Neiman.
Mm-hmm.
And he stood in admirably for Taylor Moton, so I'll give him his flowers there. And then DJ Wanham, who we haven't seen. All of those guys, if you total up that annual average value of what they're making, it comes out to $34 million. And had we signed Brian Burns last offseason, the $27-28 million, then we'd even have more room and maybe have been able to keep a guy like Frankie Louvu. And I'll tell you this much. If we had been able to keep Burns and Frankie Louvu for around $40 million, I would much rather have that than the list of players I just listed off for around $34 million. It's, again, just bad practice by the front office.
When you look at that group, probably Burns. But the way I look at it is Burns or Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. And I'm taking the two guards there.
But you could have had Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis, and Brian Burns.
I guess.
You decided to do this whole...
Then our defense would be... Like, we're already, I don't know if we're a top 25 worst defense of all time or whatever. Our defense would be the worst of all time, I think. Like, it would be approaching that because there would be no veterans at all. Like, it would be Burns, Derek Brown, who's out for the year, Shaq Thompson, who's out for the year, and, like, a bunch of UDFAs. Like, that would be the state of the defense. So, I kind of look at it as the two guards for Burns. Like, in my head, that's how I rationalize it. And I'm cool with that, right? Our O-line is top 5. After last year, it was, like, bottom 3. So, completely cool with that. The final thing on the team building front I want to talk about is don't forget the offseason, of, I believe it was 21. So after Rule's first year, we had Hassan Reddick, after his second year, Hassan Reddick was a free agent. Stephon Gilmore and Dante Jackson were free agents. And a couple of other people, I think Robbie Anderson got signed that offseason too. Those guys were let go of because David Tepper wanted to pursue a certain QB that's in Cleveland now, who his coach is at gunpoint every press conference saying, yes, Watson gives us the best chance to win. When it's clear the owners are telling him to do this. Watson doesn't give you the best chance to win. He's the worst QB ever through 6 weeks. Like, it's untenable. And I think if we hadn't pursued Deshaun Watson and for, 4 months, kept that amount of cap space open, maybe we could have re-signed Hassan Reddick. He isn't doing his saga right now if he stays on our team. Could have re-signed Gilmore, who could have taught some of the younger corners, taught J.C. Horn, who missed most of that level.
Year. You could have kept Gilmore, J.C. Horn, had Hassan Reddick, and then maybe, yes, you do ship out Brian Burns as part of that Chicago trade. Like, I would have been so much more comfortable shipping Burns out had Reddick been on the roster. And we talked about that last year. Again, it is just it's mistake after mistake, and
it starts at the top. That's my point. Like, this isn't like as bad as Matt Rule was. He wasn't the worst part of what's happened throughout the last 6 years, ever since 2018, around there, 2019, around there. I can't put it all on Matt Rule. I just don't think Matt Rule was ready, and he was just bad at speaking to reporters. I think we can agree with that as well. It wasn't all Frank Reich's fault, even though he was very. Seemed like micromanaging the offense and stuff like that. It starts at the top with Tepper. That's my point there. But to some more positive things, I guess, for other fan bases around the NFL today, we had a football game last night. The teams that played in it were the Bills and the Jets. So related to my take last week, I said that the Jets' classic uniforms would help them prevail. They almost did, but Mike Williams slips on what was close to the final play, and Rodgers is picked off on like a 40-yard pass down the field. So about 12 hours later this morning, and this guy was already in New Jersey, it seems. The Jets trade for Devontae Adams. they send a 3rd-round pick, which can be a 2nd-round pick if Adams makes an all-pro team or if he is a starter in the Super Bowl. I think those were the 2 stipulations. I don't think either of those things are happening. So it's going to be a 3rd-round pick going to the Raiders for Davante Adams to be a New York Jet, to be reunited with Rodgers. They were both on the Pat McAfee show today. I don't know if you saw, Rodgers was there talking to McAfee and who's the guy who just, AJ Hawk, the linebacker. Yeah. And Davante Adams comes up and walks behind him and kind of sits there. So he was already in New York or New Jersey when the trade went down. Like he was ready to get out of Las Vegas. So my question to you is, what are the implications for the Jets going forward this year with that? Because they take on all his salary. They said that they're going to rework his deal because his cap hits are enormous in 25 and 26. So they're going to have to do some finagling there. But does this solve the Jets is my question to you. We talked about it a little bit last week when they fired Saleh. I think we all agreed a bit prematurely. Does this solve the Jets?
Why do we think adding a wide receiver to a fairly deep wide receiver room? Am I going to call it great? No. But when you have a guy like Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, who's been producing, has rapport with Rodgers, you have a rookie in Malachi Corley, you have Tyler Conklin, you have a good running back duo. The issues are on the offensive line and protecting Aaron Rodgers and giving him time. The issues are not having a play caller who can get guys open in space to make plays for the quarterback and make this easier. And so when you look at that and those being the issues, adding another wide receiver is only going to be a marginal benefit on the offensive side. It's going to create a whole number of issues from a cap standpoint. This is a team that traded for Hassan Reddick, didn't fix those issues, are probably going to end up trading him, and they could use his edge presence, getting after the quarterback and generating more explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball to help, again, the offense. So, again, I don't see Davante Adams being the solution. This team is 2-4, and I don't think that puts them over the top. This wasn't a team that was a Super Bowl contender already. I was much more in approval of, and why I'm wary of it, because, again, it's another older wide receiver, but Amari Cooper getting traded to the Buffalo Bills earlier today. And that, to me, signals a team that is trying to compete in the AFC, has kind of gotten pushed around by some of the better teams. And I'm more looking at that Baltimore Ravens performance a couple weeks ago on Sunday night and having the horses that keep up with some of the better teams in the AFC. That's a smart move to do when you're 4-2, not when you're 2-4. This just screams that if this doesn't work out, everybody's getting fired in the building and the Jets are back to square one, and they'll probably end up picking in the top 5, not this coming draft, but the draft afterwards, because they'll have to just blow everything up.
Yeah, and if you look at the compensation for both of them, for Adams, it was a 3rd that can become a 2nd. It's not going to be a 2nd. And the Jets take on all his salary. Amari Cooper to the Bills, it was a pick swap. So Cleveland got a 3rd and a 7, and Buffalo got Amari Cooper in a 6th. But Amari Cooper is a free agent this year, so they're not on the hook for all this money like the Jets are in the future with Adams, like you talked about. This is a move for a team that very obviously didn't have a wide receiver one in the Bills. You saw last night how Keon Coleman didn't get a ton of run. Khalil Shakir was a little bit banged up coming into the game, but I don't think he has the makings of a receiver one right now. This is a team that's trying to compete. And like you said, the Texans beat them. The Baltimore Ravens beat them. Those two teams are at the top of their divisions respectively. So if the Bills can rattle off wins, it was a close win last night. A lot of missed kicks on both sides. But if they can add this guy and he can help them win, it was completely worth it. On the Jets front, I agree with you. This is not a cure-all move by any means. The offensive line still does struggle. The defense, man, they could use a guy like Hassan Reddick, who about an hour after the Adams trade broke, the news broke that he has permission to request a trade now, that he has new representation in Drew Rosenhaus. So I don't know if he'll end up on the Jets to finish the year. The Detroit Lions, who are at the top of their game, just lost a pretty good edge rusher. So maybe they're in the market for a guy like Reddick. Who knows? I guess my final question is on the Raiders front. What does this mean for them? Is it fire sale time for them? Like, is Max Crosby going to be a Panther anytime soon? Like, that'd be pretty cool. But like, I don't know. You have a couple guys on that Raiders roster that I think could be moved at like following Adams. I wonder if they're going to try to move anybody else, or if this is like look, Adams wasn't going to play here anyway. if he wasn't going to play, let's keep the guys in-house and try to build for next season. Maybe the Raiders can draft a QB with a top pick next year. Who knows? What do you think the state of the Raiders is going forward?
I think they like what they have in Brock Bowers. They've gotten decent wide receiver production out of Jacoby Myers, and Trey Tucker is a great you can add more talent in the draft and free agency next year. I think shipping out Max Crosby right now is a little premature. And the reason why I say that is they just sunk a huge investment in the Christian Wilkins. They want this to be a good defensive line. We got to see if Tyree Wilson can take a step in year 2. And so if you can have 3 really good defensive linemen, that can set you up for success on that side of the ball. So I think being a defensive head coach in Antonio Pierce, if he's able to squeeze out a few more wins, they're able to get to kind of that 5 to 7 win window, so to speak, they're going to be in good shape. And I think that if they're able to add a quarterback in the draft, add another wide receiver, more talent on the back end of the defense, this is a team that can start competing. So as long as the front office and ownership is a little bit patient with this kind of vision and direction that they're now taking, I think they're in good hands. So I don't think they're going to just jump ship. I think Max Crosby is still a Raider. We'll see, though, if somebody offers maybe 2 firsts, because that's a lot of draft capital. That allows you to do a lot of different things with a rebuild. And if you get that kind of offer, it's kind of hard to turn down unless you're the Panthers and Scott Fitter. So I think that being said, the only thing around the NFL that was interesting, Russell Wilson took snaps with the first team. Apparently he's healthy from the ankle injury he suffered in the offseason. So he may get a shot at the starting role. The team is 4-2, mainly because of their defense. It's just interesting that you're shifting to an older quarterback that doesn't give you necessarily the explosive playability that Justin Fields does in the run game. We'll see if Wilson's able to, I guess, run Arthur Smith's offense a little bit better. Arthur Smith hasn't been asking a lot of middle of the field throws. Again, something that Justin Fields and Russell Wilson both throw in. So the seamless transition between quarterbacks should hopefully be the same in the passing game. I just think you lose that added boost in the run game.
Yeah, for sure. I don't understand this. Like, to me, this is a, hey, we promised you'd be the starter when you got here, so we're going to give you a chance kind of thing. But I don't know how you can go away from Fields right now, and the team's 4-2. I think he has 10 total touchdowns to 2 interceptions, which is like really good for Justin Fields. He had a ton of turnovers in Chicago. Solid now. If it ends up being like Russ is the starter for the rest of the year, because they do have a conditional pick going to the Bears regarding Justin Fields snaps. And I wanted to ask you, this is why I wrote a little note down before the pod. What do you think of the Panthers finally getting Justin Fields back when they were supposed to, when Teddy Bridgewater was here, to be the starter next year as a bridge? Would you be interested in a little Justin Fields bridge QB for a year or something like that action?
I think you have enough talent at the wide receiver position that you can run a more read option, run pass option offense.
And the O-line is solid too, you know.
It is. And he's going to make some boneheaded decisions, but that gives you at least a few explosive plays you're not going to get with an Andy Dalton and Bryce Young. And that can be exciting for both the fans and just your opportunities of winning football games. I think a lot of the rebuild in the offseason has to be focused on the defensive side, getting Derek Brown healthy, adding obviously edge rushers, and then probably some more linebackers to kind of boost this defense and give us a chance to stay in games late in the game, because that's where Justin Fields is kind of getting the benefit here in Pittsburgh, is the defense is winning him games by being able to give him the ball in advantageous situations or keeping the opposing team from just running up the scoreboard and allowing the team to stay in the game. So there are just elements and layers to Justin Fields playing as efficiently as he is this year. I wouldn't say it's just off the charts, but it's something to monitor, and maybe a guy we go towards next year. Now, in regards to Russell Wilson, back when I was initially getting into analytics, I ran a quarterback model that factored in kind of the cap allocation to wide receivers and offensive linemen on a team, and was able to kind of project based on if the quarterback had moved teams or if the coach was just recently hired, to see those impacts on quarterback efficiency. And believe it or not, the year I ran it was the year Russell Wilson got traded to Denver. And a lot of people thought the Denver Broncos were Super Bowl almost darlings, so to speak. They would kind of just waltz into the playoffs and make a run of sorts. And the exact opposite happened. They fell apart after giving Russell Wilson a massive contract and just cut him this offseason, incurring one of the largest dead cap hits in league history. I don't think the only thing that could probably touch that number right now is one of the quarterbacks that have just been recently extended, or if Deshaun Watson were to be cut in the next year or two. Those are the only kind of cap hits that might hit above 100 million. And I think Russ came in at about 83. All that to be said is I nailed that evaluation because the model projected him to be worse than Geno Smith. And so the next segment that we're going to be talking about is who we hit on. What did we get right in the offseason? Last week we covered who we missed on, and I think this is a good kind of segue into, okay, who did you think from a player, coach, and team standpoint that performed at expectation or better, and that you were high on to begin with? So I'll let you take the floor, kind of talk about who you want to out of the three categories that we're going to be working on within this segment.
Yeah, that was a really good intro there. And I'm going to keep it at home right now. When we did our awards, we have like some that we came up with ourselves, like breakout player of the year, fantasy football player of the year based on their ADP, and underrated player of the year, like maybe a starter, maybe somebody that isn't getting national attention, but they're going to be really good. And I said Chuba Hubbard. I thought he was in line to have a really good year. The offensive line was fixed, or we thought it was fixed. It clearly is fixed, particularly in the run game. And he's going crazy. I know before this past week, I don't have the numbers now, he led the league in success rate on runs, which means as far as moving the chains go, he was the best in the business. Right now, following this past week, he was 5th in yards per carry. The only people that were ahead of him were Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. I believe Tyrone Tracy was one of them, and I can't recall who the 4th player was, but Chuba was top 5. Just all-around good player. He's the engine of the Panthers offense. The only question is, can he get more carries? Like Dave Canales, give him some more carries, just a few more. But then David Montgomery, the Detroit Lions, change of pace back. You can call him the starter. I don't know where you like 1A or 1B with Jahmyr Gibbs, whatever you want to say. He just got extended. I believe it was $19 million over 2 seasons. My question is, would you give Chuba that? Because the way Chuba's producing, I think he'd get around that, or maybe even a little bit higher. And could we have Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard being our thunder and lightning, our version of J. Stu and D'Lo for the next 3 or 4 years if Chuba's able to stay healthy? Would you pay Chuba like market rate, I guess, 19 over 2 or something like that?
So I don't have David Montgomery's stats in front of me. I'm assuming he was 1,000-yard rusher at Chicago at least 1 year or close to. And I think last year he was definitely over that. Was a huge touchdown machine for the Lions last year. Obviously, he's working behind a phenomenal line. But then again, so is Chuba this year. Chuba hasn't gone over 1,000 yards. So that kind of hurts your negotiating. I think David Montgomery was also drafted higher than Chuba. That also plays a factor in some of these contract negotiations. All that being said, I would see him getting paid in more the $6 to $8 million range per year. That would be my initial guess of what his contract would look like. Obviously, because front offices and teams are more aware of just the running back age curve and how production kind of dips, a 2-year deal makes a lot of sense. And maybe he takes a hometown discount because we took a flyer on him on day 3. I don't know if I would necessarily hand him a 19 over 2. I think that's a little too rich, especially when there are a lot of other holes on the roster. And we could probably grab another guy in the 4th or 5th round next year to back up Jonathan Brooks going into 2025. So I would rather let him hit the open market if that's kind of the market he's demanding, and maybe get like a 5th or 6th round compensatory pick for, I believe that would be 2026.
Yeah, for sure. And I think your guy that you hit on also came from one of our made-up categories there, like underrated breakout fantasy football player of the year. This is a guy both of us were high on. He was a first-round grade for me when I did my my draft stuff over the summer. But this is a guy that's on like all of your fantasy teams. I'm kind of jealous that you have him. You ended up beating me this past week. I'll say all my players were injured. I'll say that. But you walked away with the win, and this guy was a big part. Maybe not this week, but in prior weeks, he's been a big reason why you've scored some points.
Prior to this week, I think he was a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy, and it's Brian Thomas. You turn on the LSU tape, and I think we talked about this last week when we were praising the LSU wide receivers and kind of the breakout performance section or player performance section. And he's the real deal. The explosiveness of these wide receivers that come out of LSU is insane. And they can play outside, they can play inside. When they get the ball in their hands, they're an absolute playmaker. And that's just always fun to see. And sure enough, he steps into a number one role when you have guys like Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, solid veterans in the NFL who have commanded a fairly decent target share in their respect. And he comes onto the scene and immediately becomes that number one guy. So I think Brian Thomas, he was my draft steal, and I think he has panned out to be exactly that, to be a top 10, top 15 wide receiver from a fantasy standpoint and be drafted in round 10 or later. I thought it was an easy pick. And I, like you said, picked him in several drafts because I just believed on just how good he could be from day one.
Yeah, he's been a stud. He's like the reason that the Jags offense isn't like unwatchable and that they're not 0-6 instead of 1-5.
He's making catches Calvin really couldn't last year. I mean, just like tiptoeing on the end zone. Obviously dropped one against the Bears on Sunday, but for the most part, this guy is just clutch.
Well, and all the Jags players are dropping passes too. Maybe it's Trevor Lawrence, who knows? But as far as coaches go, my player was positive, your player was positive. I'm going to go negative on my coaches, and it's Mike McCarthy. I have long been an anti-Mike McCarthy proponent. I don't know how you failed that many times in Green Bay when you had probably the best prime of a QB we've seen yet. Maybe Mahomes is getting up there. And to start this season, he loses Dan Quinn, who has captained a top defense over the entire course of his time in Dallas. They were number one in turnovers over that span. They were pretty close to they were top 5 in EPA per play allowed in that span. And just a lot of good players on that team when Dan Quinn was there. Dan Quinn leaves to go coach the Washington Commanders, who, by the way, are 4-2 now. Really good team. Better record than the Cowboys right now. He takes a couple players with him, and that defense has plummeted since he's left. And granted, Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence were out this past game, but they weren't out the first 4 weeks. They had him there. And at home this year, this is the big stat. Last year, the Cowboys were 8-0 at home, one of the best home teams during the regular season, We know what happened in the playoffs during that home game. And during their home games in the regular season this year, it's been like that playoff game. They've gotten smoked. It hasn't even been close in a lot of these games. The Saints came in and cooked them week 2. They barely beat Pittsburgh on the road. It took some Dak heroics there. And then this past week, the Lions kind of just destroyed them. It was a revenge game for what had happened last year with the bad call where the guy was ineligible and the ref didn't understand it. It looked like he turned it back to Dan Campbell and stuff like that. They made up for it this week. The Lions were giving plays to the O-lineman, kind of stunting on him, and it's just looked really, really bad for Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys. We talked about it during the season or coming into the season, how Dak wasn't on a contract, Mike McCarthy wasn't on a contract. Well, Dak is signed now. He's their quarterback of the future or of the next couple of years, presumably. McCarthy still isn't signed, and one of the things that was going on during the broadcast was right following the broadcast was how close Jerry Jones is to Bill Belichick. Like, he adores Bill Belichick. They're really good pals and stuff like that. Is Bill Belichick going to be the coach next year? Because Mike McCarthy doesn't have a contract there. And then when people were questioning Jerry Jones after the game, like he does a presser, he takes questions after every game. Jerry Jones said, "Well, I'm not an idiot, all right? An idiot couldn't run the team like this or do any of this, so I'm not an idiot, okay?" I think that somebody touched a nerve there, and he's kind of fed up with McCarthy. I don't know if there's going to be any changes made during the bye week, because their bye week is this week. But it doesn't seem like Mike McCarthy is long for the Cowboys in the future. And I couldn't have said it any better over the summer because he hasn't shown anything to me.
So in Mike McCarthy's defense, the Cowboys aren't big spenders in free agency. Spent a lot of their draft picks kind of rebuilding, retooling the offensive line where they lost some key pieces in free agency. Obviously, their center, Tyler Biadasz, goes to Washington with Dan Quinn. Tyron Smith leaves for the New York Jets. Obviously, a guy that didn't have a lot of playing time, but those are two key roles on an offensive line. You have rookies in those spots, and so that's been up and down. You look on the defensive side, Mike Zimmer has not been able to be viable in terms of finding a solution against these Shanahan-style offenses. And when offenses got bigger against them, they've gotten the doors blown off them. You look back at Obviously, the Saints shellacking in week 2, but the Ravens game shortly after that wasn't nearly as pretty, even though the Cowboys clawed back into that one. And then you look at what the Lions were able to do. I mean, they're playing hook and ladder with their offensive linemen and their wide receivers and just toying with them. And so that's more the disrespectful thing, is they aren't able to compete with these teams that are able to get bigger. They didn't find a solution to that. And they need Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence back so that they can at least generate a couple sacks, generate a couple negative plays that help the offense on the other side. I think Dak Prescott has shown a couple good things this year. They need to keep feeding CeeDee Lamb, finding out if Jalen Tolbert is that number 2 wide receiver. It feels like Brandon Cooks has lost a step. He is a little bit older in his career. And so it's at this point where, can you find a way to win 9 or 10 games? This is a team that had won 12 games 3 straight seasons. I understand what you said about Dan Quinn being there for that whole duration, but I'm not going to necessarily hang Mike McCarthy out to dry when he's had success in the past. And so can he find a way to claw back, be a wild card team, and show that, hey, with another draft class, we can be right in the thick of it? Do I think he's a long-term solution? No. Do I think Bill Belichick is the answer, though, in his 70s? Absolutely not. I think Bill Belichick's time is come and gone. We'll see if Jerry Jones has a change of heart about that come this offseason. But if you're the move on from Mike McCarthy, I don't think the solution is to bring in somebody as old as Belichick.
Could be a Ben Johnson team. Who knows? I mean, after seeing Drake May, that'd be a really good pairing in the
maybe we'll see go to New England. Ben Johnson may try to squeeze his way in
We'll
there.
see. I think you've given me a runway for my perfect take this week, but your coach that you want to talk about is somebody that you pegged as being coach of the year, and it kind of looked like that might have been out of reach after some injuries early on, but they've clawed back, and if they can maybe win that division, I know they're in a tough division, maybe LaFleur can pull it off.
The NFC North is the best division in football right now. It's not.
It's a bloodbath. It's a bloodbath.
It's going to get gaudy. We have the Vikings and Lions this week, so that should be a lot of fun. The Packers, you go 2-0 with a backup quarterback that you traded for in the offseason, and Matt LaFleur is making it work. He's finding ways to win football games. I believe I said he was a top 2 coach when we were talking about kind of coach rankings in the offseason. I felt like he was underrated, and I think he keeps showing the reason why he's so valuable as a head coach. So I think I had the head on the nail with that one. We are still kind of in the waiting period about Shane Waldron. Some of the stuff he's shown over the past couple of weeks at least gives me hope, because I thought he would be on the who we got wrong segment last week, and he's slowly getting off that list and kind of in limbo right now. So Matt LaFleur is the guy that I hit on from a coaching standpoint. And I'll wrap this up with my team before we get to yours. And I think it's a conglomerate of teams. I thought the top 4 teams in the AFC would be Chiefs, Ravens, Texans, and Bills. And sure enough, those are your division leaders through 6 weeks. The Chiefs and the Ravens are the top 2 teams in the NFL right now, and they look the part. And so I think that being kind of how the AFC is falling. Obviously, the Bengals don't look nearly as good as we thought they would. The Jaguars don't look competent at all. And so maybe we see a wild card team outside of maybe an AFC North team in the Chargers or the Broncos kind of sneak in. But we'll get more into that when we get into those in the hunt discussions, probably after the halfway point in the season. For you, this goes kind of in line with who you were talking about as your coach, Mike McCarthy, the team that shellacked him, that you had a lot of high hopes coming into the season, obviously dealing with an Aiden Hutchinson injury after this past week, but still look like a dominant team to be reckoned with and one of the best, if not the best, in the NFC.
Yeah, I think I had them as my 1 seed. It's the Detroit Lions, like you were alluding to. I certainly had them winning the Super Bowl, I believe. I had Dan Campbell as coach of the year. I was all in on the Lions this year. It's going to be interesting, right, to see how they can respond and rally around the Aiden Hutchinson injury, who was far and away the pressure leader to start the season through, because I think they had their bye week in week 5, right? Because they're 4-1 now. Yeah. So through the first 4 weeks, he was far and away pressure leader. Obviously, ends up with a lower leg fracture, so he's going to be out for the rest of the season. I saw somebody say that he might be back for the Super Bowl if they make it. I don't know about all that. That seems premature. But the question is, how are they going to replace him? They could be a Hassan Reddick team, maybe. They could be a Max Crosby team if a team's willing to throw some first round, because they have all the requisite talent around that spot that they could afford to lose some first round picks. Who knows? Because you got to think they gained first round picks from the Rams a couple years ago, so that kind of balances it out. That's the question. What can they do without Hutchinson? But on the other side of the ball, the offense, like we're talking about, they're just embarrassing teams with what they have been able to do. And I think this week, like you're talking about the game versus the Vikings, it's going to be a huge test as to what that offense is capable of, because Brian Flores is commanding the number one defense in the league. That's going to be the matchup of the week to me. I can't believe that it has been flexed. I think, it's still a 1:00 game, and I get it. They're both like that in the Great Lakes area. I guess you could call them an East Coast team or an Eastern half of the league team, but come on, that should be the night game or something like that.
I think they're Central Time too, so it's like a
they are
like
Central, yeah.
Game. Like what are we doing? Like make it a 3:00 for them, a 4:00 for us. Like that seems like the perfect. I get not flexing the Sunday night. It's too early in the season to do that. Like give them one of those like prime time slots where you have Greg Olsen as a broadcaster, and I think and he might be the broadcaster. I'm just saying like that's the vibe this game gives off.
Well, I think it'll be Fox, right? Because it's two NFC teams, so we could see Greg Olsen there. Who knows? But that should be a really, really fun game to watch. Last week was all about humility, and we got these guys wrong. No, we nailed these teams, these coaches, how these players will perform. We nailed it this week, and that just bodes well for our takes later on in the episode. But what we need to highlight is the best performances of the week. You kind of talked about it earlier. I think the top 3 NFL draft picks this year, the top 3 QBs, really all played well this week. Caleb Williams obviously helped eviscerate the Jaguars in London on Sunday morning, the 9:30 game. 226 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. The interception was really bad, but other than that, he looked in command of the game the entire time. I think he only threw 4 incompletions, including that interception. So really, really good performance there. Jaden Daniels, they finally take another loss, but it was to the Baltimore Ravens, so you can't be too mad there. 269 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Drake May, who was, I think, both of our QB1s in this class, finally makes his starter debut in the nice red and white helmet Patriot uniforms, Patriot Pat uniforms. 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions versus kind of a tough defense that D'Amico Ryan likes to throw around. For a rookie QB, or for that to be his first start, rather, I thought that was super impressive. Spencer Rattler also played as well. I don't think his performance was as gaudy as these 3 quarterbacks' performances, but it's nice to see the rookie class all doing well, especially after last year, when I think right now you can only walk away by saying, hey, CJ Stroud's the only starter going forward. And as far as right now goes, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, Will Levis all don't look to be starting QBs to me. It's nice to see that there are multiple starters that you can have hopes for throughout the season and through future seasons with these 3 guys that performed on Sunday.
I know we traded up in the wrong draft class, because if we had gotten either one of these 3 quarterbacks, it seems like we would have done just fine. The Caleb Williams interception, you're absolutely right. It was a corner route to DJ Moore, and you got to throw it to the pylon. And he knew it coming to the sideline, and that would have been a crazy stat line. To have 0 interceptions, 5 touchdowns would have been completely gaudy. Unfortunately, rookie mistakes kind of shine through. Caleb Williams is definitely looking a lot better than he did earlier in the year, but I'm waiting to see how he performs against better competition, against defensive lines that can generate some pressure, if he's going to have answers. And it was good seeing in the Jacksonville game, just his eyes constantly scanning back and forth, finding the reads, finding the open guys, seeing what the defense is giving him. So again, a lot of progression on that standpoint. What you want to see from the first overall pick, Drake May, excellent throw to Kayvon Booty for that. I think it was like 40, 50 yard score. He's one of the best deep ball throwers coming out of college, and he definitely made his bread and butter with that play. But I think one of the more impressive ones was where he moved Derek Stingley, I believe with his eyes, maybe even a pump fake, to then throw the ball into a very tight window to complete a pass. And that was a very cool play to see. I think it was Demario Douglas who was the receiver on that one. But again, just to have the ability to move defenders with your eyes and with your body, and then be able to make a play like that was very special. And it's one of the reasons why he was taken 3rd overall in this past draft. But Jaden Daniels, I want to talk about Jaden Daniels a little bit, because this guy is an absolute stud. When we compare him from an expected points added standpoint, which is pretty much just yards with context, it's taking in game situation and how efficient are these performances that we're seeing from quarterbacks. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I have a graphic up that shows Jaden Daniels' cumulative EPA through 6 weeks to other notable, and when I say notable, like we're talking all-time great MVP seasons. 2013 Peyton Manning, 2007 Tom Brady, 2011 Aaron Rodgers, 2018 Patrick Mahomes, 2019 Lamar Jackson. And Jaden Daniels, why he is below all of those guys except Lamar Jackson through 6 weeks, he is right there with him. He has, since 2002, the 20th most EPA through 6 games. And there's only 12 quarterbacks ahead of him. A lot of these quarterbacks have multiple seasons over that span that meet this criteria. And so for him to be doing this, he is not only a tier above these other rookie quarterbacks, he's doing it with less talent and then putting up MVP numbers. All these quarterbacks that I just listed off, Peyton Manning, the gaudy offense that he had with Demario Thomas, Eric Decker, the offensive line, Tom Brady in 2007 with Randy Moss and Wes Welker, Aaron Rodgers coming off a Super Bowl victory with one of the deepest wide receiver rooms and a lot of talent on defense, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce. Who does Jaden Daniels have outside of Scary Terry? His offensive line is one of the worst in the NFL, and he is putting up these numbers like it's nothing. He's 4-2. The Panthers play him this coming week. And when I tell you I am scared that they're going to put a 50-point burger on us, I am terrified. I hope that they are up so much going into halftime that they just decide to bench their starters, because that is how well Jaden Daniels has been playing through 6 weeks.
Man, looking at that graph, that Peyton Manning season was outrageous. Was that the 55 touchdown season?
Yes. And that's what I'm saying. Like record breaking. And Jaden Daniels he's not necessarily on par with them, but to be
he's a rookie. Like that's the point here. Yeah. Like we talked about how good Stroud was last year, and think about like Baker's rookie season, Justin Herbert's rookie season, like in recent memory.
Jaden Daniels has more total EPA than CJ Stroud had all year.
Right.
All year, and it's not even the halfway point.
And he's doing this with lesser talent, I think we can agree, than like you talked about a lot of these MVPs. Maybe you could talk about Lamar Jackson's talent of that first
you had
MVP
Mark
year.
Andrews, you had a couple wide receivers,
I would, like Willie Snead was probably your best, or no, Hollywood Brown.
Yeah,
it's incredible what he's doing. And I think it's a really good segue into the upcoming game where we are going to Washington to play the Commanders, another 4:00 window game. I'm starting to like those. You know, I've been a 1:00 guy like forever, but I kind of like those 4:00 games. You can watch Red Zone for the first section of games and not feel like you have to watch the Panthers as well. You don't really have to watch the Panthers at all this season based on how it's going. And if it continues to trend the way it is, how you think it might go, this might be another blowout, right? This is an unstoppable force in Jaden Daniels and the Washington offense versus a very movable object in the Carolina Panthers defense. The only things that you can kind of glean and look at, like key weakness points. They did struggle a bit versus the run with the Ravens. Now the Ravens have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. We don't have anything close to that, but Chuba Hubbard is a good running back. And they just lost Jonathan Allen, probably their best defensive lineman for the season, with a torn pec. That's like key number one. Pound the rock, run the ball, and maybe we can score some points there. That's about it. All right. Like, where else are you going to look here? Their corners aren't necessarily world beaters, but neither are our receivers, especially when Andy Dalton continues to miss open receivers and make bad decisions. The only thing I can kind of hang my hat on is, can we get some reinforcements back like we talked about at the top of the show? Can Jonathan Brooks come back this week? I don't think he will. When they open the practice window, they have the 3-week window. Very rarely is it, all right, he's able to practice, he can immediately go into a game, right? He's coming off an injury. He needs to get into game shape first. So don't know if we can see him, but hopefully Clowney can play in this game. He didn't play versus the Falcons. Maybe we can get Amari Barno or DJ Wanham back along the defensive line. Maybe Dane Jackson can be back in the secondary, so we can rotate some guys around back there and mix some things up. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty bleak. I said that this was a winnable game at when we started the show. And I think it is, if we can stick to the run and make them stick to the run. But here's the key. They also have a good running game too. Brian Robinson is a very good runner this year. He gets buckets and buckets of touchdowns. And Jaden Daniels, we know what he can do with his legs. So The win condition, I suppose, is we keep the ball a lot of the time by running the ball, and they make a couple crucial errors. But other than that, it's pretty bleak. I think I'm going to pencil in a Washington victory here and leave it at that.
So I think the big thing to take away is last week the Ravens gave us a blueprint to be successful in offense. Zay Flowers had a monster first half. You know, a guy who can play a similar role like that, very, very quick in and out of his breaks. It's Deontay Johnson. And when we get in late down situations, passing situations, and Washington is playing man coverage, if you are not throwing to the wide receiver Benjamin St-Juste is covering, you are doing yourself a disservice. This guy can't play corner at the NFL, couldn't last year, can't this year. You just need to spam that because whoever your wide receiver is, heck, it could be Jonathan Mingo. He's probably winning that. But Leggett, Coker, Deontay Johnson, if they ever get one-on-one opportunities against Benjamin St-Juste, they need to be taken advantage of, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, taking a balanced approach on offense, you look on the defensive side, we have one of the worst running defenses in the league, just hands down. We allowed 200 yards to Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier last week, and it's going to be a similar story this week. In unbalanced sets, which are pretty much when an offense has like trips to one side or more skill position players to one side of the center than the other. So if it's not a 1-by-1 look or 2-by-2 look, it's a unbalanced look, so to speak. That's usually a telltale sign that the offense is going to run the ball. There's only 5 teams with a pass expectation over expected in unbalanced looks. Now, the 2 best teams in unbalanced looks heading into last week were the Washington Commanders and the Baltimore Ravens. And they were able to run very successfully in those looks. So between their screen game, which will mitigate any pressure we're able to generate on Jaden Daniels, and their running game, I think it is very hard for us to slow down anything that the Commanders and Cliff Kingsbury are going to throw at Ejiro Evero in this depleted defense. Our only hope is getting a couple guys back from IR that can be contributors on the defensive line. And for some reason, J.C. Horn just locks up Terry McLaurin. That is really the only hope you have going into this game. And to lead into Purrfect Takes, because I think this is a great segue, my perfect take is the Panthers lose by 2 or more scores. I don't think this is close. I think this is at least a 14-plus victory for the Commanders. I don't know what the spread is, but I will definitely take it because I know it's not double digits. And that's just the state of where we're at right now. I don't see us staying competitive past the second or third quarter. I think by the time we get into that second half and deep into the game, it will be done and over, and we will be booking our flight back to Charlotte.
When you say 2 or more scores, you're talking touchdowns? So are you saying
yes,
okay,
14 plus,
or more?
14,
okay.
14 or more, yes. And I should have been more clear. It's just I don't see how we're stopping their offense, especially when they went through stretches against teams like the Giants and the Browns, who I think have better defenses, and didn't punt. They aren't going to punt against us.
The Bengals don't have a better defense.
Drive.
Yeah, the Bengals don't have a better defense, but they didn't punt or have a turnover in that game. So it just shows you how like crazy, not only crazy efficient, but crazy like explosive this offense is. And that's a hard thing to beat, especially when you have a bad defense. So I can certainly see where you're coming from there. If you look at our like point disparity, other than that Raiders game, it's been like 14 or more points in every game, except the Bengals one, I think. My take, and you kind of gave it to me earlier when we were talking about the Cowboys. You said maybe they can rally and win 9 or 10 games and make a wild card. I don't think so. This is going to be a futures take, a rare futures take that isn't instantly solved or like we instantly get it right or wrong. By the way, we both got ours wrong last week. Just to throw that one out.
We're on like a 5-week stretch where we're just not.
I got one right like 2 weeks ago. Yeah,
but that's what I'm saying. For the most part, you can fade us on this section. We did a lot better last year. I don't know what's going on this year, but it's not been a hot start.
The takes are getting hotter, and this one's going to be boiling. All right, the Dallas Cowboys will not have a positive record this year. They will not reach that 9-win mark. I don't know if they'll even get to 8, but I think they will win 8 or fewer games this season. Even though coming into the year, I think we all could have thought, hey, this could be a wild card team, 9 or 10 wins. You know, they have a lot of the same players. McCarthy's still there. The offense should still be good. No, they're not going to have a positive record this year. 8 and 9 or worse. I'm going to go 7-10 or worse to make it a little bit more of a spicier take.
So here's my take, because the NFC is really, really good, especially with the NFC North right now, and a few teams in the NFC West, and obviously the NFC East with the Commanders and the Eagles. If the Cowboys are eliminated from the playoffs, obviously kind of hit this under win total that you're projecting, is Mike McCarthy fired in season? And I know this isn't part of your perfect take. I'm just curious if he's even fired before we get to week 18.
Let me pull up their schedule real quick, all right?
Because, let's see this. I'm very curious where you're leaning on this one.
Because they currently sit at 3-3, correct?
Yep, 500. So you're saying that they don't get what you're saying, they get 4 or 5 more wins is what you're saying.
Yes.
No more than that.
And
you want to share the screen for their
Sure, yeah, I can do that. Let me share screen. Cowboy schedule. Boom. All right. This is what we're looking at here. They are on their bye week. Oh, geez, 47-9. They're on their bye week right now. 49ers. They are going to San Francisco after this. I'm going to call that an L. I'm going to count them out. They're going to Atlanta after this. I'm going to call that an L too.
I think that'll be close. I think that'll be a lot closer. I feel like that's like the Steelers game.
All right, Eagles. I'm going to split the division. I'll give them that one because they're at home. They are losing to the Houston Texans. That's another L. That's 3. They are losing to Washington in Washington. That's 4. Because division, I'll split it. I'll give them the Giants. So that's another win. The Bengals is a tough one. I don't know about that.
Is it in Dallas?
It's in Dallas. So I'm going to but they stink at home this year. Dallas stinks at home.
They don't have the home field advantage. I can see that being a shootout. Like, to me, that gives off the Seattle Seahawks, Dallas Cowboys game of last year, where it's just back and forth.
Yeah, let me make this easier. Let me count their wins. All right. Eagles, Giants, like split. Commanders to split, like division split, and Panthers. I don't think they're winning any other
Falcons
games like that.
Yeah, and if they win the Falcons, they may not beat the Commanders.
And if they get to those 4 wins that I just laid out, one from each of their division rivals and the Panthers, that yields a 7-10 record. And by that point, we're looking at a team that if they lose their home games, they will have been eliminated from the playoffs, I think, after the Bucks loss. Or they might be in the hunt technically. You know how they always have the graphics like on the bubble part, but they're not winning that division. So in season firing, I don't know. When's the last time they fired a coach in Dallas? It was Jason Garrett, right? And I don't think was that in season. I don't remember.
No, the last in season firing that they had was Wade Phillips when Jason Garrett took over as the interim. So
that was in 2008 or something.
It might have been 2009, but I remember that was early on into the season too. So I don't know if the wheels come off and they're 3-6, 3-7. Who knows if they go on a little skid here?
Yeah, if by the time they get to, let's say, that Panthers game, and they've racked up 9 losses, he'll be fired. I'll just put it that way. If they lose the Panthers game, he's not leaving Charlotte. All right, let's just put it that way. I agree with that. I remember when we had Matt Rule. I think it was year 2. When there was a streak of after Rule would win versus somebody that would get fired, we might see that come back into play if they can't beat the Panthers. Because I know it's not a home game technically, but the way our stadium is playing now, it's a home game for them. So, and they haven't been playing well at home, so who knows? My point is 7-10 or worse, and we can tack on an in-season firing to McCarthy if you want to have a secondary take tacked onto it.
I was just curious if you thought that would be the case, because that would be a complete implosion. I do think that they might be able to muster 9 wins, but you got to win 6 and win a game or 2 that nobody's expecting you to right now. So definitely some interesting takes.
The last thing is, if you looked at their wins, they were close. Like that Steelers win was pretty close. Like the Browns win, all right, they won that one, but it
was week 1. The Browns look awful.
So I don't know. Like they're treading some murky water.
It's definitely not clear, that's for sure. It is definitely full of a lot of interesting narratives, and we will have more narratives for you all next week. If you want to follow us on Purrfect Takes, you can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your media content, we'll be there. We'll be back next Tuesday afternoon to break down, obviously, the Panthers and Commanders game, along with other news around the NFL. Until then, we'll catch you guys next week.